All right. Hi, everyone. This week I have a special event. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend and associate, Molly Tipping. And Molly and I have known each other for a really long time. So she used to be my Pilates instructor when I was in my 20s, I think. And then we sort of lost touch. And then over the years, Molly drifted into thinking about Feldenkrais, which she might tell us a little bit about. And I became one of her first practice clients when she was learning the art. Oh, you've frozen, Molly. Oh, no, you're back. That's good. um, and we've both been really interested in questions about embodiment, but have traveled slightly different pathways. Our kids both went to the same school for a while as well. Oh, they do now as well. Yeah.
They do now.
So I thought that it would be really interesting for you all to hear from Molly because she thinks very deeply about questions of touch, which is what we're obviously exploring in this week's topic. And so I'm going to ask Molly a few questions and she's going to answer them, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue probably. And the first question that I really wanted to ask you, Molly, was about your history of working with touch. If you can kind of talk us through that and how you have found yourself getting more and more interested in questions around touch as you've gone along in your career.
Yes. Okay. Well, I suppose as a dancer, that's the first kind of career that I had. We are working with touch kind of accidentally in a way. So I come from a contemporary dance background, and in that place, you are developing your touch, but you're also kind of just lying on top of each other, rolling all over each other. It's just this immersion in touch and contact, and so you don't even know that you're learning about touch in that process. And so you develop this real ease with being in the proximity of other people's bodies. And that means in terms of like lying, in their armpits, or maybe even having your head in their genitalia, that like the body starts to really change into a space of welcoming and exchange and playfulness. And we lose that kind of sense of, oh, this is my body, and it's private and you can't come near it. And we all start kind of getting undressed, we're all naked in the room together. So we really start to kind of inhabit ourselves very freely in a contemporary dance space. Not everybody would necessarily have that experience, but definitely for me, that's the experience I had, is really one of, oh, this beautiful body that I have, and none of it is off limits, I suppose. And then when I went into the Feldenkrais training, you have to learn very deliberately how to touch people. And so it's a 4-year training. The first 2 years are very much around understanding movement, and the second 2 years are very much around understanding touch and relational exchanges between one person and another person. So that kind of co-regulation of the nervous system. And I'll tell you a story because it's quite interesting. So when I was learning touch, and I was like in my sort of late 20s when I was doing Feldenkrais, I was working with another student, and we were, doing our hands-on work. We were, feeling in the body, what the body was telling us, all of those things. And I called the teacher over and I said, I can't do this. This is too intense. I am receiving too much information from this person's body, and it's just freaking me out. And it was just this, I was crying. I was like, this is too much, right? So it was this real thing of that level of intimacy that I was gaining in connecting with this person with very slow hands-on touch, really entering into their nervous system space, really going quietly with them, was ginormous. And she had to literally talk me through the teaching of the practice with me crying the whole way through it.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was ginormous for me because I was like, wow, when you put your hands on someone, you are connecting with them in a way that is so deeply intimate. It's kind of shocking, actually, in a way, particularly when it's not necessarily a stranger, because she was someone I knew, but we were strangers in that intimate space.
Mm.
And that, in a way, as I suppose, has been what I have worked with, is how to touch someone, how to be in that intimate space with someone and be completely present
Yeah.
to the intensity of experiences that will come up.
So you had to learn how to regulate your own capacity to receive that information.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to accept that I would receive this person fully when I touched them.
Mm.
That touch has no way of lying.
Yeah.
When you chat to someone, when you talk with them, you give them a neat little version of who you are. And when you touch someone, there's no filter. A body tells you everything about how this person is experiencing themselves, their history of being alive, everything.
Yeah. And I'm noticing as I listen to you that I'm getting this little flutter of excitement in my solar plexus. And the reason I'm naming that is because I've been inviting my students to think about how their bodies respond to the readings and to this, what happens in our class. And the reason that we've been doing that, Molly, is because, as you and I have discussed in the past, we tend to leave our bodies at the door when we enter a classroom.
Totally.
Or
or anywhere, just a home.
And actually that kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about with you, which is that's probably intensified that process of checking out of our bodies in the context of all of these movements. So the feminist movement, the gay liberation, civil rights, disability activisms, all of these movements that have really focused our attention on how physical contact can be the site for so much abuse of power.
Yeah.
And, the solution has been to codify or to even, prohibit various forms of physical contact. And we feel that in classrooms, and teachers feel it with their students, particularly in the younger years, in fact. So it's quite a bit kindies and primary schools. So, there's all of that going on, and we've been thinking about that. And I guess I'm interested in how you have navigated all of this stuff about the politics of touching and the power, politics and the power dynamics of it.
Yeah. So I would say, going back to that first experience of touch, I had to recognize the complexity of touch in terms of that it is so ridiculously intimate. Like it blows my mind. And when I'm working privately, I am navigating that level of intimacy, because not only am I going, oh, when I touch you, I receive all this information, but I'm also recognizing when I touch you, you feel me touching you. And that is going to be received by you in lots of different ways. And I can touch you with kind of firm pressure, push into the bone, push into the muscle, and you'll be like, oh, she's pushing into my muscles, and that feels safe. Whereas if I touch you in a way that's much more like a mother might touch a baby, which I will be doing deliberately, that's going to be received by you, by your nervous system, in a very particular way. And I have to navigate my touch, because sometimes my touch is going to be heading into that direction of intimacy that I go, oh, this person might receive this as an intimate sexual touch. Now, that's a conversation that with some of my clients might actually be really deliberately held, that we're really going to hang out in that space and be like, okay, so this touch feels very heading towards that sexual experience of touch. This touch feels like a pleasurable touch, but if we just change it slightly, we can make it, as we've talked together, we can make it more about the sensuality of touch, the deliciousness of touch, the the warmth and the yearning and the craving of touch as this kind of beautiful thing that awakens our body into kind of tingly enthusiasm for being alive. And we can really hang out in all those spaces because my hands and my nervous system have become so attuned to that I can touch in really differently and deliberately different ways. And that's going to be the client's question. Now, in terms of working in the performing arts, because that's where I also work at a university called the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, and I work in the dance, theatre, and music spaces, I am deliberately now teaching consensual exchanges with the students around touch. And it is such a rich, complex space to be navigating because in a way, let's say if we hang out with dance for a while, in a way, dance, we kind of strip the body of consent in a sense. Like I'd said to you, that story of being a dancer, we're kind of trying to neutralize every area of our body so that no one area is considered private or sexual. Like we're actually going, no, we're going to make this just a body,
Yes.
just a body.
When you were speaking about that before, the language that came to my mind was that you're kind of losing your boundaries with
Yes.
dance, right? And so there's this really boundary crossing work that's going on between bodies. Sorry, continue. But
absolutely. So we are putting down defenses. We are putting down restrictions and boundaries and saying, let's be bodies together. Let's welcome this exchange of flesh with flesh, of cells with cells, of squishiness with squishiness. Like we really get into that space. And I have to say, it's an absolute gift. It just blows my mind that this is something that can be received in a process of dance. And it's really fascinating because in a dance context, there are ramifications for that aren't positive. So there's this incredible positivity in learning to be boundaryless.
mm-hmm.
But there are lots of other consequences where people literally dancers will become incredible boundary overriders. They don't listen to the subtleties of, oh, this doesn't feel comfortable. And that might be in pushing through pain as well, which is not around touch, but is around just everything is fine. And so we're now bringing consent into dance, and we really have a massive struggle because we've recognized the beauty and the incredible gift that the boundaryless gives us, but we also want to make choiceful again the way in which dancers are touched. But I have to say, dance is in a pickle with it for sure, because if we go back to I'll give you an example of a colleague talking about one of the students who is her daughter, and she's in a ballet training institute, and they have changed it now that the teacher is not allowed to touch the student. Okay, so in dance, you get lots of corrections. The teacher comes along and they adjust your pelvis and your head, and they'll touch you, very deliberately to say, this is the posture you need to actually achieve that maneuver. And of course, in the old days, they would have, had pointy nails and they would have poked you, or they would have stick and whacked you, this is very old times. So there is this thing of removing touch from the teaching practice. And they've now changed it. Was at Victorian College of the Arts. Then I think that they were navigating, this experience. WAPA has a different experience, but we're all confused and trying to work it out. And the teachers had said, if you want corrections, you need to ask for them, right? And so the students, okay, well, they're going to ask for corrections. But in a ballet context particularly, but definitely in dance, corrections are only given to the best students, right? This is inculcated into the dance mindset. And so the students won't ask for corrections because they don't feel that they're worthy of them, right? Like the whole hierarchy or the power dynamics of dance is such that the students don't feel that they can ask for corrections. And occasionally you have a few confident students who will ask for corrections. But in a way, they've been inculcated into a powerless role, particularly in ballet, in the pursuit of something excellent. Like it's a very messy and complicated thing. We have been inculcated into a boundaryless space in the pursuit of something excellent. But there's these massive consequences.
You're making me think. So I also was a dancer for the benefit of the students. And there's something in dance about becoming the instrument of the choreographer's will, in a way, a lot of the time, at least in my experience. And there's something about giving yourself over, giving your autonomy away.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel really uncomfortable and really quite sad, actually, that's how dance has been developed, especially in the West in the 20th century. I mean, we're talking about a really Western
We're talking about very Western lens. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
sorry, I probably should have put that up to the front.
Well, it's okay, 'cause we've done that in the unit. So the students know that in the Western context, we're really, really good at, checking out of our bodies and thinking in really disembodied ways. So we've discussed a lot of that. And there's something there, what you're talking about is in dance, a conversation about learning to negotiate between faithfulness to the self and respect for the other, and how do you move between those spaces. And I think that's a pretty good segue into Betty Martin's work. And I want my students to know that I'm actually indebted to Molly for introducing me to the work of Betty Martin. And I wanted to hear from you, Molly, why you think her approach is so important and useful. So, let's talk about that. The students have read some Martin this week, and they've played the 3-minute game as well. Right. Someone they trust outside of the class. Yeah.
Look, Betty is a gift to the world. She has been doing this work for decades. Betty's work also comes out of sex work. And it's really important that this is honoured. I think sex workers are the best people to be talking about consent. In the same way that if I was going to learn about driving a car, I would also probably want to learn from someone who's, either a taxi driver or a race car driver, someone who, or a 4-wheel drive person who's literally out in the bush. They are in the riskiest sort of areas. And so they have learnt the most information about it. And so as a sex worker, it's high risk, really, really high risk. And so Betty has become really interested in, how do I be in this space? And what are we actually doing here? And it just led her on this gorgeous, gorgeous journey. And lots of people who are connected with Betty and that particular group of people are really interested in consent, but not consent from a rule-based order where a diplomat has come along and said, we need to not touch people because it's an occupational health and safety issue, right? We may get sued, and so we are removing touch. This is from the other end. It's like, we are engaging in touch. We want to touch. This is what we are here to do. How are we going to do it in a way that every single person who is engaging in this is really having a fantastic time? And then the reality is we go, there's some interesting dynamics about touch. So if I touch you on your back, let's say I'm giving you a rub on your back because you're upset. Am I touching you because it's for your benefit? Or am I touching you because it's for my benefit? That I will be regulating my nervous system by helping to calm you down? Or because I am just one of those touchy people. I love to touch people, and it's how I connect with people. So I have to touch you to feel connected to you in this moment. In general life, it's for both people. But if you're crying, let's say, and I'm rubbing my hand on your back, you might not want to be touched. But socially, we're conditioned to touch people when they're sad. And so what will happen is we engage in these social exchanges. And what Betty is saying is, well, actually, let's get interested in how the touch is being received by you and how the touch is being sort of experienced by me as the giver. Yeah. And so the 3-minute game is really kind of extrapolating on that. And it's saying, how would you like to be touched? Yeah. And then you sense into your body and go, actually, my shoulders feel like they'd like to be squeezed, like, oh, squeeze them. And then I'll sense into, oh, yeah, I'm willing to give you a squeeze. And so what starts to happen is we start to recognize what it is that we want to receive, and we start to name it. And so I've had funny exchanges with people where I've said, oh, can you like smush your face into my belly? And they just, and they'll just start laughing. They'll be like, is that really what you want? And I'm like, it's exactly what I want. Or I'll say, can I smush my face into your belly? And they'll be like, is that really? And I'm like, yes. So what's so gorgeous about the 3-minute game is suddenly a really random kind of experience erupts from the consciousness, erupts from the body that says, I want you to scratch my feet, I want you to like punch the back of my, waist, like all kinds of really peculiar things come up, because actually the body is this gorgeous instrument of touch hunger, for touch in all kinds of ways, touch that awaken us, touch that soothe us and calm us, touch that makes us want to kind of wriggle because it's like, oh, that's verging on tickling and I'm kind of enjoying it and kind of not, but actually I want it. Touch that is very sensual and delicious, and it makes you realize bodies are beautiful. And then touch that is sexual as well, that it starts to excite that kind of eros, the kind of the sexual energy kind of starts to build up, and we feel that kind of very deliberate sexual feeling that is associated with touch. But ultimately touch just elicits all kinds of things, really.
So many things going on in my mind. That last talked about, I loved that you were starting to alert us to the diversity of touching, right? So there's so many different ways of touching one another, and different meanings in some ways that can attach to the ways that we touch, which is just really important, because I think one of the things I want the students to be thinking about this week, and that also the reading by Bell Hooks invites us to think about, is we have a tendency, particularly in the West, to reduce touching, all kinds of touching, to having a sexual connotation. And as she tries to differentiate between sexuality and sensuality, right? And that's so quickly anything sensual gets kind of I don't know, shifted off.
Well, it suddenly becomes a sexual experience, and it's like, it doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be.
And there's something here about literacy, right? So when we are literate in sensuality, then we're less likely to read all of these different ways of touching as always sexual, right? And I guess that's what I was starting to think about.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about the dance context, because in a way, because we train sexuality out of touch, what we do is we build literacy in so many other aspects of what touch can be. And in a sense, that's definitely something I would say that I have really gained from my experience of being in the performing arts. And then we kind of think about a sexual touch as well in context of the person that we are with, so that it then becomes much more, this is a sexual experience because I am with this person, or this is a sexual experience because I am choosing it to be a sexual experience. And I think the other thing, like say we were down at the beach the other day and a woman was sunbaking topless, and I just had this wonderful moment of realizing, or remembering really, because that's something that I think about all the time, is we sexualize that in Australia. We say, oh, she's naked. Oh, she's got her boobs out. Oh, she's turning me on. But in Europe, that's what we would do. We would just lie around the lakes and lie around the oceans topless, and it's not sexualized. So if we think about touch as an extension of gaze as well, that we are not just talking about touch as an isolated thing. We're talking about our gaze, and our assumptions of what bodies mean.
Yes. And
Breasts are sexual.
yeah,
And that's sometimes why people find breastfeeding so confronting, because the breast is sexual. So how can breastfeeding be allowed to occur in a public place?
yeah.
Or my partner is breastfeeding, but they are my breasts that bring me pleasure as a sexual partner. And you know, we have big conflicts around that, because like, well, no, breasts are just breasts, and there's lots of things that they do for us.
There's lots of feminist work about the gaze in particular as a way of possessing, right?
Yes.
That really goes with a kind of patriarchal mindset. And the feminist philosophical answer to that has been to turn to objectifying and touch as the grounds for a kind of relating that is less objectifying is what you're talking about there, but also more respectful and interested in and curious about the other.
Yeah.
So we're talking about an ethics of relating. And I think, I mean, that's some of the things that you've talked about quite a bit this morning, is even in the context of dance and also in the context of sex work as well. What's going on there is a process of negotiating the boundaries between what's good for me and what's good for you. Or, you know, if I was thinking in my own psychotherapeutic training, we'd be thinking about self and environment, or organism and environment, and how we negotiate the boundary between those two things, which we're doing all the time. And you're talking about increasing our awareness of that process in all of the things that we do all of the time with one another. And when we start thinking about touch, we start to realize, you said before, oh, we're engaging in touch, but we're also always engaging in relationship. So touch becomes the basis for thinking about what it is to be in relationship with yourself, with others, with the environment.
Look, one of the things, so I think if we switch back to Betty for a second, and Betty's work, one of the reasons that Betty uses touch is because she says you will get a direct and very loud learning in using touch about how you relate to other people, how much you are willing to overstep your boundaries, or how protective of your boundaries you are. And you will get a very deliberate and direct experience of power dynamics. And so all of the work that Betty brings, there could be theoretical elements that you can apply outside of the touch realm. And so sometimes I'll be like, oh, you know, I'll be thinking about the doer and the done to, or I'll be thinking about the server and the acceptor, and the kind of relationships that Betty has drawn in her wheel of consent framing.
So power relationships.
The power relationships, absolutely. But one of the things that I always come back to, I have a mentor in Australia who I work with. She's a wheel of consent practitioner, a very experienced one in Australia. And I'll be chatting to her about, you know, some of these dynamics, and they'll be outside of the touch context. But for me, they're relational dynamics that fit into that framing that I really love. And she will always say, and this is what Betty will always say as well, take that dynamic and put it in a touch relationship. So I have a colleague in Perth, and I'll be like, oh, I need to go and work with her, and we need to touch each other in that dynamic, or experiment with that dynamic through touch. Because if I keep thinking about it, I will not get the answers. I will only get the answers by being in close proximity to that person. So that thing of like, touch is about proximity as well. If I am close enough that I can touch you, I'm already eliciting a whole heap of physiological processes. That being said, I cannot touch you really, like physically I can't. And yet if I, you know, get closer to you, I change my proximity, or I even kind of reach out my hand to touch you, you're going to feel a whole heap of physiological responses to that, because we are physiologically touch is about proximity. And so I can change my proximity to you, and you will register that as a change in boundaries or a change in kind of potential for touch. But what is so great about Betty's work is she says, put it in a touch context. So whatever question you have, use it through touch, use it through the dynamics of who is doing, who is being done to, who is giving, who is receiving. And then you will find your answers. Because again, the body doesn't lie. The body cannot kind of make up stories of, oh, well, actually, I wonder if this is because yada, yada, yada. It's like none of it is capable of doing that. It's like, whoa, I just got this really full-on sense of not being happy with that.
Yeah.
So clear.
Yeah.
Or I got this full-on sense of just going, oh, please more.
Yeah.
Or I started to go, that's great, but could you move a little bit? Could you slow down a little bit? Could we take a break, but I want to go again? And so it's like the touch is about immediacy or clarity of relational skills that you could spend hours talking about, but in 1 second, you go, whoa, I got it. I just got it.
Learning about how to negotiate with others in every other context.
Yeah.
I agree. So there's something here, and we don't have time to talk about it, but I want to name it, about how important touch is. And yet we live in a really globalized world where we can't always be in contact with each other. And you and I are not in physical proximity right now. So there's a whole piece there that I want my students to be thinking about, but you don't have to think about right now. But to wind up our conversation, what you're really saying is that touch is pedagogical, right? That it's an intense learning experience about how to engage with others, how to be in relationship, how to do healthy relationships, which is the catchword of most sex education these days. And so then there's a question for me, and I think for the students in this unit, about, well, if that's the case, why are we removing touch from our classrooms, and what do we do about it? What are your fantasies like about how that, if you're a curriculum designer, how...
Do you know what? For me, it's like removing it's like saying, oh, look, no one, okay, so like I went to an Indigenous community many years ago, and it was in the middle of the desert, and they had a swimming pool, and it was closed. And it was boiling hot. It was summer. It's like, why is the pool closed? And I'm like, oh, because we don't have a lifeguard. There was no one competent in the eyes of occupational health and safety to look after the pool, right? So we remove things from our lives because we feel that we don't have the competency to be able to offer them properly. And in a touch illiterate society, the safest thing to do is to remove it.
Yep.
Let's say I'm not good at managing my sugar. So the safest and the easiest thing for me to do is to not buy sugar and not have it in the house. But actually, if I become more literate, more choiceful, more conscious, then I can have sugar in the house and it doesn't matter. If we train up lots of people to be literate with water, then we can have the pools open all the time. And I think this is the thing with touch, is that in reality, most of us are illiterate in experiences of touch. And so when we see it, we have no idea what to do. When we see children touching each other in ways that create a threat response in us, we have no language, no skills to know what to do. But sometimes people will also be threatened by children playing in a way that has no sexual connotations, and yet that person will see it as sexual, and so they will shut it down.
Yep.
And so I feel like we're in a wonderfully interesting place perhaps at the moment, which is that in removing it, perhaps we are at an early primitive stage of learning,
I agree with
which
that.
is that we have made a choice to do something, but it is a very binary choice. And it is a choice which limits learning or creates learning in a very particular way. But hopefully in this first step of the maturation of consent, which is gross in terms of it is very simple, that we start to develop our literacy to be able to bring it in very particular ways, and also to start to be like, oh, that's normal touch, and that we start to love our bodies not as sexual entities simply, but that we love our bodies because they just feel crazy, weird, wonderful, everything. And we start to go, oh, I just want to be like, squished in this way. And yeah, and I'm not even going to interpret why I want that. I'm just going to turn up to the full embodiment of feeling that.
Yeah. I think that COVID, the experience of isolation, has really sharpened what you this collective sense of there's something missing here. So I share your optimism about perhaps being at a turning point.
Yes.
And I wanted to say, I just want to squish you, Molly Tipping.
Squish, squish, squish.
Now, because I'm so grateful to you for showing up today, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And you're
exactly. Well, here's what we can do. We can all kind of squish ourselves, like
oh yeah, don't
squish
go ahead.
ourselves, like squish
Okay.
our own selves, like squish ourselves a bit, just like give ourselves a little squish. Because in the absence of actually having someone who can touch us, we can actually squish ourselves either just with our muscles and our movement, or we can actually squish ourselves with our own hands, which is great.
Excellent. Make sure you're all doing that, students.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you're all giving yourself a squish because you're all squishy, and it's nice to kind of go, oh, look, I'm all squishy.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Molly. I know that the students will love listening to you. I'm going to say goodbye to you now officially and hit unrecord. Hold on.
Bye.